Okay guys, so today in class we're going to be learning about different cell types, specifically two different cell types. So here are the picture of the two cells we're going to be talking about, and before I tell you what those two cells are, I want you guys to go ahead and looking at these pictures, what are some similarities and differences that you notice between these two cells? So Tara, do you notice anything different? Maybe what about the size? What about the size of the cells?
One is a lot bigger than the other.
One is a lot bigger, so which cell is bigger?
The one on the right.
Cell B?
Yes.
Okay, so cell B is bigger, so size is a difference. Macy, do you notice anything else?
This one has hair-like structures.
Yeah, so this one, those are called pili coming out. These little hair-like structures coming off of the membrane of the cell. Good, so that's in cell A. Do you guys notice anything maybe about the structural components of the cell? Any similarities or differences?
Cell B seems more organized.
Cell B, more organized. Why do you say that? Are there more or less structures?
There's more.
So there's more structures in cell B. So would you say cell B is a little more complex?
Yes.
Yeah, so cell B looks maybe a little more evolved, a little more complex than cell A. Okay, do you guys see, maybe do you think both of these cells contain genetic material, like DNA, within their structures? Do you guys kind of see maybe things that look similar to DNA? Yeah, maybe. Okay, so yeah, there are DNA in both of these structures, but you guys, like you said, cell B, it's a little bigger. It looks a little more complex than cell A. So we know that cell A is a little smaller and has a couple other different characteristics. Maybe the membrane is structured a little differently within cell A. Okay, so these two cell types that you guys just discussed and figured out some differences between are actually prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So all cells within our bodies are either, or all cells just in general, not within our bodies, all cells are either prokaryotic or eukaryotic. And we're going to go into what exactly those words mean and characteristics of those cells in a second. But there are so many different types of cells. You just think about within your body, you have liver cells or heart cells or blood cells, all different kinds of cells. But all cells on Earth are either classified as prokaryotic or eukaryotic. And today that's what we're going to be discussing. So first of all, what exactly is a cell? So a cell is the basic structural unit of life. So all living things, no matter how big or small, contain cells. And like I was saying, there's so many different types of cells, but all in all, they can be categorized into one of these two types. So all cells on Earth are either prokaryotic or eukaryotic. So knowing the cell structure, and knowing kind of based on those characteristics that you guys saw in cell A and cell B, which one do you guys think evolved first? Which one do you think is the older cell type? You think prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Prokaryotic. Prokaryotic because why, Macy?
Because it has a nucleus.
Well, we're going to get into the nucleus in a second, but prokaryotic, maybe just based on the picture, did it look a little less complex?
Yes.
Yeah, so prokaryotic looked a little less complex. So maybe based on that alone, you know that eukaryotic cells evolved after prokaryotic cells. Okay, so let's get into the specifics. So we know that prokaryotic cells, the main thing that you need to know as far as differences is that prokaryotic cells do not contain a nucleus. So the word pro, the prefix pro actually means before. And so kiri, or that root word in the middle, is relating or referring to the nucleus. So that word literally means before nucleus. So we know that prokaryotic cells do not contain a nucleus. I was asking you guys about the DNA in those pictures that we saw before. And you guys knew or kind of had an idea that both cells contain DNA, but that the DNA structure looked a little different in both cells. So within prokaryotic cells, the DNA is normally singular. You normally have single strands, and it is circular. So kind of, you're looking up here, you can see a single circular DNA strand. Prokaryotic cells are all unicellular, and what that means is they are single-celled organisms. So the entire organism only has one cell. It's not composed of many cells, it's only composed of one cell. Prokaryotic organisms, again, going along with the complexity, they do not contain organelles. And when we say organelles, we mean different cell parts. So within the cell, there's a nucleus, there's a couple other structures, maybe the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus. We're going to talk about some of those later, but those are not found in prokaryotic cells. You will not find organelles within these cell types. So kind of a little way that you guys can remember, prokaryotic does not have a nucleus, does not have organelles, is a little less complex. Think pro rhymes with no. So when you hear prokaryotic, just know that that is no nucleus, no organelles, just pro rhymes with no, and you guys can remember those characteristics. A couple other characteristics about prokaryotic cells is because they don't contain a nucleus, all their DNA is not held within a specific membrane-bound component. So DNA is just located in this general region called the nucleoid region. So within the nucleoid region, that's where you would find the DNA or genetic material of a prokaryotic organism. And then like you guys said, prokaryotic cells are smaller than eukaryotic. So you know that eukaryotic cells are smaller because they do not have as much material within them. They don't have those organelles. They don't have as much structures compacted within them. So they are smaller. They don't have to be as big. What about eukaryotic cells? So when we're thinking eukaryotic, let's go back to what exactly eukaryotic means. So we know that the carry part in the middle is referring to the nucleus or relating to the nucleus, and the U part at the beginning means true. So eukaryotic means true nucleus. So we know that eukaryotic cells do contain a nucleus. They do have a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, because they're organisms that are eukaryotic and contain eukaryotic cells, are normally multicellular organisms. Most of the time, these organisms have many cells within their body, and they're not just a single-celled organism. So mostly multicellular. And then when we're talking about the DNA of a eukaryotic cell, we know that the DNA is not a single circular strand like in a prokaryotic cell. It exists as many strands. So many different strands make up the DNA of a eukaryotic cell. So again, increased, it's more evolved, a little more complex. And then another thing, so eukaryotic, it does contain a nucleus, and it does contain those organelles that we talked about beforehand. So those organelles, an example of organelles would be mitochondria or chloroplasts, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum. In a later lesson, we're going to talk about the specific functions of all these organelles, but right now you just need to know that eukaryotic cells do have these organelles that carry out very specific processes for these cells and help maintain life. Okay? All right, so eukaryotic cells, knowing that they do have a nucleus, we know that their DNA is not just floating around in their cytoplasm. We know that their DNA is enclosed within a membrane, specifically the nuclear envelope. So the nuclear envelope is what holds all this DNA in that specific structure, so it's not just floating around the cell. And then again, in relation to size, we know eukaryotic cells are bigger than prokaryotic cells. So eukaryotic bigger, prokaryotic smaller, when we're comparing the two different cell types. You guys saw that in the first picture. You know that eukaryotic cells can be significantly larger than prokaryotic cells. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about different domains. So in relation to eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. So when we're talking about domains, we're talking about classification, kind of referring to taxonomy. So when we classify organisms, we do it, the main basis, the most general category are domains. So one of the domains is called archaea. Specifically, the kingdom within this domain is archaeobacteria. So this domain is prokaryotic. So all cells within domain archaea are prokaryotic organisms. Okay? The next domain is domain bacteria. So we know the two domains that kind of have bacteria in their name. We know archaeobacteria and then bacteria, which the kingdom would be eubacteria within that domain, but those are both prokaryotic. So when we're talking about bacteria, we know bacteria are prokaryotic organisms, and that can help you guys remember the domains, domain archaea and domain bacteria. The last domain is domain eukarya. And you guys can probably guess just by the word itself, eukarya, that the organisms within domain eukarya are eukaryotic. So specifically, when we're talking about eukaryotic organisms, the kingdoms included in that would be plants, animals, fungi, protists. Those are all eukaryotic organisms, mostly multicellular organisms that are much more complex than a single-celled bacteria. Okay? So you guys just remember those three domains because all life branches off of these three domains, and then it goes into more specific classifications and categories after that. So, all right. So we talked about how prokaryotic and eukaryotic bacteria are different. Now let's talk about some of the similarities between these two, because they're both cells, so they have to have some things in common. So they both contain DNA. They both have genetic material. They, maybe not necessarily DNA. Sometimes they may have RNA as their genetic material, but they all contain genetic material within their cells. They both have cytoplasms. So they both have that gel-like structure inside the cell, where in eukaryotes, that's where all the organelles are found. And in prokaryotes, that's the DNA or the genetic material would just be within the cytoplasm, in the nucleoid region. There'd be the region of the DNA, but that's just found within the cytoplasm. Both of them do have cell membranes. So the cell itself is composed within a membrane. A plasma membrane that controls what comes in and out of the cell. So absorbs nutrients, takes in nutrients, excretes waste. That's a part of the membrane's responsibilities. And then they both contain ribosomes. And what ribosomes do is they make proteins. So those are very important for both of these cells. And both of these cells do contain this specific cellular component. So those are just some of the commonalities. Although these cells are very different, they are similar in a lot of ways. Okay guys, so now that you've learned a bunch of different knowledge about prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms, maybe even more than you wanted to know, we're gonna play a little game where I'm going to describe an organism, and I want you to raise your hand if you know if it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Based on the characteristics we talked about, if you want to reference your notes, you can, but try to do it based on just what we discussed, and we'll see if you guys can get those correct. So number one says, I'm a microscopic organism that lives in extreme environments. I lack a nucleus, but that doesn't stop me from surviving in fierce conditions. Who am I? So which cell type do you think that is? Macy.
Well, it says it lacks a nucleus, so I would say it's prokaryotic.
Exactly, perfect. If it does not contain a nucleus, we know that it can't be a eukaryotic organism, so it has to be a prokaryote or a prokaryotic cell. So good, Macy. All right, so what about number 2? Number 2 says, I'm a plant that contains large amounts of chloroplast. Who am I? You guys remember talking about plants? Do you remember, Tara?
Would it be a eukaryotic?
Yeah, it would be a eukaryotic organism. So we know that plants, remember plants, animals, fungi, protists, those are all eukaryotic organisms. Okay, so we know that they are more complex and have, and chloroplast would be an example of an organelle. So do eukaryotic organism contains organelles? Yes, they do. So we know that this has to be a eukaryote or a eukaryotic organism. All right, okay, my genetic material exists in many strands, which allows for me to perform more complex tasks. Who am I? Do you know, Macy?
Prokaryotic.
Okay, so do you remember we were talking about the DNA structure? For prokaryotic, do you remember it being circular and single strands or many different strands? For prokaryotic. Single strands, yeah. So if we remember prokaryotic just being a single strand, just one strand, what would this one be if it has many different strands? Eukaryotic, and we know it's more complex. And you guys know the complexity, the more complex it is, it must be eukaryotic. So this one is actually a eukaryote. All right, okay. My cells are smaller than others, but they're still crucial to survival. So which one is smaller? Tara, do you remember which one's smaller? Yeah, so a prokaryote. Prokaryotic cells are smaller than eukaryotic ones. So good. All right, what about number 5? I'm an animal who needs lots of energy to chase my prey. I'm able to fulfill my energy needs by having a lot of mitochondria within my cells. Who am I? Macy?
I would say a eukaryotic cell because it's an animal.
Yeah, it's an animal. We know that animals are a lot more, humans are classified with animals as well, and we know that we are complex organisms, and mitochondria is an example of an organelle, so this has to be a eukaryote, or a eukaryotic organism. What about number 6? Tara, my DNA is normally found in a single circular strand.
Is that prokaryotic?
Yes, because it's only a single strand, circular, so less complex. So we know less complex means prokaryotic cell. All right. Macy, your turn. So number 7, a nuclear envelope protects my precious chromosomes from damage. What cell type am I? Which one has their genetic material enclosed within that specific membrane or nuclear envelope? Eukaryotic, good. Because remember, do prokaryotic cells have a nucleus? No, they do not have that membrane-bound nucleus. So that has to be eukaryotic. Okay, number 8. I do not contain any organelles, but who really needs those anyway? So what do you think that is? Tara, what do you think that is?
Is that a prokaryotic?
Yeah, prokaryotic, because prokaryotic cells do not contain organelles like eukaryotic cells do. So great job. All right. Number 9, I'm a fungus that can sometimes cause infection. Who am I? Macy, do you remember if it's a fungi, if it's in kingdom fungi, do you remember if that's prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Thinking about those domains.
I would say eukaryotic because fungi is classified under eukaryote.
Exactly. So we know that fungi is within domain eukarya, so they have to have eukaryotic cells. So it's a eukaryote. Good. All right, last one. Tara, this is for you. So I'm always unicellular, and my DNA can be found within a nucleoid region. So always unicellular. So unicellular is just a single cell organism. So not as evolved, and they don't have their DNA within a nucleus, but within a nucleoid region. So you think it's prokaryotic or eukaryotic?
I think it's prokaryotic.
Yeah, you think it's prokaryotic. Why? What was your trigger? Unicellular. Yeah, so we know that most prokaryotes or prokaryotic organisms are single-celled organisms, like bacteria. So that is great job with that, you guys. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding about what exactly eukaryotic cells look like and what prokaryotic cells look like. Yes, Macy?
So, like you said, humans have eukaryotic cells. So everything, can they be made up of both cells or just one cell?
No. So it would be a eukaryotic organism. So that means all of our cells, we are multicellular organisms. We have a lot of cells within our body. Every single cell within us, you think about, blood cells and liver cells like we were talking about before, those all have a nucleus within their cells, and they have that genetic material in that enclosed membrane, specifically the nuclear envelope. And we are very complex. You just think about the complexity of humans or animals or even plants, a lot more complex than a single bacteria. So we know that we are eukaryotic. Okay, so what I'm going to have you guys do now is, since you guys know a lot of similarities and differences, I have these Venn diagrams for y'all, and we are going to do a little activity where I want you guys to compare. So at the top, I want you to put prokaryotic or prokaryote, whatever you want to write, on one side, and then I want you to write both in the middle, and then I want you to write eukaryotic on the other side. And I want you guys to look at your notes, ask me a question if you need to, but I want you guys to go ahead and determine what are some similarities you found between the two, some of the similarities we may have talked about, and what are some of those key differences. I want you to come up with at least 4 if you can, about things that are specific to prokaryotic cells and that are specific to eukaryotic cells. And then we can talk about those after you guys write it down on your papers, and we will discuss to make sure you guys have a good understanding. What about organelles? Which one has organelles? Prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Remember, organelles are those little cell parts, like the mitochondria, the chloroplasts. So they have organelles. Prokaryotic, not so much. What about size, Macy? Which one's bigger and which one's smaller? Try to get at least 4 on each side. If you can get more, that's great. Try to get 4 on prokaryotic cells, 4 on eukaryotic cells, different characteristics. And maybe if you can find 4 that they have in common, we will go over some of this. Let me know when you guys are finished. Are you done, Macy?
Yeah.
Awesome. What about you, Tara? All finished?
Yes.
Okay. So, Tara, can you tell me what you found about prokaryotic cells? What are some characteristics?
The DNA is single-strand.
Single-strand DNA and circular normally too. Okay, what else did you find? Give me 4 things.
It's smaller.
Smaller than eukaryotic cells, good. What else?
No organelles.
No organelles. What else does it not have?
A nucleus.
Yeah, no nucleus and no organelles. Good, 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 good. Okay, Macy, what about you? 4 things about eukaryotic. Let's just do eukaryotic.
I said that they have organelles.
They do have organelles.
And that it does have a nucleus.
Does have a nucleus.
And when comparing it to prokaryotic, it's bigger.
Bigger, so again, more complex.
And then its DNA is multicellular.
Yeah, it's a multicellular organism. So mostly, there are a couple exceptions when we're talking about different protists. But when we talk about fungi and plants and animals, those are all multicellular organisms, and they are in domain eukaryotes, so they're eukaryotic organisms. So good. Can you guys tell me a couple of commonalities they share, maybe? Maybe give me one, Tara.
Ribosomes.
Ribosomes. They both make proteins. What about you, Macy?
They both have DNA. One's
They-
just single and one's
Yeah, so they do both have DNA. They both have genetic material. Do you know another one, Tara?
They both have a cell membrane.
Cell membrane. They do both have a cell membrane. They have that plasma membrane around the entire cell. They don't both have like that nuclear membrane, but they do both have the cell membrane. Did you remember one more, Macy?
They both have cytoplasm.
Cytoplasm. Yeah, that gel-like area right within the cell. In eukaryotic, it's where those organelles float around. In prokaryotic, the DNA would just be found within the cytoplasm itself in that nucleoid region. Okay? So good, good, good. All right, well, before you guys leave today, we kind of have a little conclusion activity kind of to recap, and I want you guys to see if you can answer these questions. You guys should be able to knock these out no problem, but before you leave today, I want you guys to turn this back into me, just so I know that you are understanding what we were talking about and having a good grasp on this information. Just so when we maybe test over this later or we do further activities that build upon these concepts, that you guys understand. So the first part, we're talking about the 2 different types of cells that we discussed. I know we went over that a lot. Second question, again, just which one doesn't have a nucleus? You know one did have a nucleus and one did not. So just remembering that. And then we talked about domains, different domains that these cells are classified into. So there are 3 types of domains that we talked about, but just make sure you get at least one domain for prokaryotic and one domain for eukaryotic cells. If you want to give all 3, you can, but let me know which one is eukaryotic and which one is prokaryotic when you list the domains. And then the next question is, you guys just did your Venn diagram, and you compared the differences and the similarities between these 2 cell types. So I want you guys to go ahead and list 2 differences, and then 2 things that they have in common. And I know you guys know, so on that first column, list those differences. 2 things, maybe, just thinking about their complexity and their size and what is contained within these cells. And then 2 things that they both have that are found within both of these cell types. Because they definitely have some commonalities. All right, so the next question asks, what's the basic structural unit of life? So we talked about that at the very beginning of the lesson. It's just, that short word. It's what we were talking about today. We're talking about different types of these today. So what is the basic structural unit of life? All organisms contain this. And then again, which type is larger? Which one's bigger? We know one is smaller and one is bigger than the other one. We looked at that in our first slide when we were comparing those 2 different pictures. So be sure you know which one is larger and which one is smaller. And the final question on your kind of your ticket out of here, your exit ticket, or our little conclusion activity is, do they both contain ribosomes? Are both of these cells able to make proteins, or not? Does only one contain ribosomes? So y'all be sure to put your name at the top of your paper. Go ahead and turn that into me. And you guys did a great job today. So tomorrow we're going to get in a little more detail. We're going to compare, now that we know different differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell types. Tomorrow we're going to discuss some differences between plants and animal cells. We know they're both eukaryotic, but they both have some distinct features. So, okay, good job today. Thanks, guys.